In this video, we are going to discuss remaining of earning payheads of employee, and I have already created the payheads and I am going to walk you through each payhead and I am going to explain how I created these payheads. So the payhead that we are going to discuss now is house rent allowance. So I provided its name as HRA, and since house rent is an income to an employee, so this will be grouped under earnings for employee, and the income type would be fixed and it is an expense to the organization, so I have grouped it under indirect expenses. And since it has effect on net salary, that is why I set this option to yes, and the name which is going to be displayed in the printed payslip would be HRA. And I'm not going to use this payhead for calculation for gratuity, so I set its option to no. And for the field set or alter income tax details, I specified income tax component for this payhead as house rent allowance, which can be selected from the list over here, and the calculation basis would be on the projected value. Then in the field calculation type, if you remember, for the payhead basic we selected as on attendance, and for this payhead we are going to select the option as computed value. So since we are going to calculate HRA at 40% of basic, we are making a computation. So whichever payheads requires computation, we need to select the type of calculation as computed value. And the calculation period by default would be selected as months, and the rounding method which I selected is normal rounding, and the rounding limit is 1. Now press the enter key. Now in the field compute, you would be asked on what amounts HRA should be calculated. So we have 4 options over here, 4 methods. So the first method says that whether you want to calculate HRA on sum of all the deductions. So earlier if you would have defined any deduction payheads, then the sum of those payheads would be selected for the HRA calculation. Or whether you want to calculate HRA on the earning payheads which were defined earlier, or on the current subtotal, which would be a net figure of total earnings and total deductions. For this payhead, we are going to specify the option on specified formula and specify the payhead on which we are going to calculate HRA. Since we are required to calculate HRA on basic, we need to specify that payhead by selecting it from the list of payheads over here. And further, if you want to add any another payhead to the payhead which you have already selected, then you can specify it again over here by selecting one more payhead. Since we have selected the payhead that we require, so we are not going to add another payhead, and select the option end of list, and over here select the slab type as percentage and specify the percentage of HRA calculation. So by specifying the percentage as 40%, 40% of basic would be calculated for HRA, and press the enter key and save the payhead creation. Alright, so now let's talk about another earning payhead, which is conveyance, which means transportation allowance that a company provides to its employees. So the name of the payhead I specified is conveyance, which are earnings for employees. Conveyance would be a fixed charge for all the sales employees. So at the rate of 800, we are going to provide conveyance to all the employees, and it is an expense to the organization. That is why I grouped it under indirect expenses, and it has an effect on net salary. And the name that I am going to display on the payslip is conveyance, which is the same name which we specified for payhead creation. And I am not going to use this for calculation of gratuity. And in the option set or alter income tax details, I have specified transport allowance from the list of income tax components for the field income tax component, and the calculation basic is on projected value. The calculation type which we specify for this payhead is flat rate, because every month a flat rate of 800 rupees will be spent towards transport allowance of an employee. So we are making a flat payment of 800, and we are not making any computation as with the HRA payhead. So we did not specify the calculation type over here as computed value, and we are making a fixed payment. So any payhead that requires fixed payment, then select the option over here as flat rate. And the calculation period over here is specified as months, and the rounding method is normal rounding with a limit of 1, and save the payhead creation. Alright, so now let's talk about this payhead overtime, which is our last earning payhead. And overtime are earnings for employees, and not necessary every time an employee will earn overtime. So that is why the income type is set over here as variable, and paying overtime would be an expense to the organization. That is why it is grouped under indirect expenses, and it also has an effect on net salary. And the name that I'm going to show on the payslip would be overtime, which is the same name as the name which we have used for payhead creation. And I'm not going to use this payhead for calculation of gratuity. And for the income tax details, I have specified the income tax component field as other earnings or allowance which are fully taxable, which is selected by default. And the tax calculation basis is on projected value, and specify the calculation type for any overtime or extra work as on production, and specify the production type as overtime, which we created during creation of attendance type. And I selected the rounding method as normal rounding with rounding limit of 1, and save the payhead creation. At this point, we are done with creation of all the earning payheads. In the next video, we will talk about deduction payheads like employee provident fund, employee ESI contribution, and deduction of professional tax. So we will discuss about those deduction payheads and its creation.